for some real creepy detailing. Goop FX.
Jump off the roof or jump off the porch with an
Shea Tracer Racers comes with what you see here.
Some of the most dangerous things in the 1970s weren't on the news, they were in your toy chest. Back then, danger came in shiny packages, and nobody thought twice. They were normal then. They're banned now. And honestly, you kind of miss them. Lawn darts, also known by the friendlier, more deceptively innocent name Yarts, were a backyard favorite in the 1970s. The game seemed simple enough. Giant metal darts with weighted tips that you tossed underhand at plastic rings on the lawn. Sounds wholesome, right? Until someone's older brother decided to launch one overhand like a javelin. These things were huge, heavy, and had points sharp enough to plant themselves deep in the grass, or your foot, or your skull. The instructions said, "Adult supervision recommended," but most parents were too busy firing up the grill or grabbing another beer from the cooler. Every family had a "that one time someone nearly died" Jart story. Kids would dodge flying steel like it was all part of the fun. Hospitals eventually started catching on, and reports of severe injuries, especially to the head, piled up. In fact, one fatal accident in the 1980s was the final straw. And if throwing weapons around the backyard seemed risky, wait until you hear what science kits were made of back then. The 1970s were all about sparking curiosity, and nothing quite lit that flame like a children's science kit filled with asbestos. That's right, the same fiber now considered a toxic hazard was once tucked inside educational toys and marketed with cartoon mascots. These kits were supposed to teach kids about heat insulation and fireproofing, so naturally, asbestos was the material of choice. Children would handle the fluffy fibers with their bare hands, pack them into test tubes, and marvel at how nothing could burn them. There were no gloves, no warnings, and certainly no understanding of what microscopic fibers could do to your lungs. In fact, many of these kits encouraged you to reuse asbestos again and again across different experiments. Back then, if something did not catch fire, it was considered safe. The long-term health risks? Nobody thought that far ahead. It was educational, it looked like science, and that was all that mattered. Today, even removing asbestos from an old building requires hazmat suits and specialized teams. If that sounds bad, it somehow gets wilder, because some kits actually gave kids real uranium to mess around with. There was a time in the 1970s when a curious kid could order a toy that included actual radioactive material. The most infamous version? The Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab. This thing came with 4 different types of uranium ore, real uranium ore. Not replicas, not glow-in-the-dark stickers, actual radioactive rocks. You could perform experiments that mimicked what real scientists did, using a cloud chamber to track particle movement or Geiger counters to measure radiation levels, all from the comfort of your bedroom floor. Sure, the instruction manual casually mentioned limiting exposure and washing your hands, but who reads that stuff when you have a nuclear lab to build? Parents were told it was educational and cutting edge. And kids? They just thought it was awesome. The danger was silent, invisible, and exciting. The lab was only sold for a brief period, largely because even back then, people started getting nervous about glowing pebbles being sold to 10-year-olds. Speaking of dangerously convincing experiences, wait until you hear about the toy guns that fired real sparks right out of the barrel. Cap guns in the 1970s were loud, smoky, and loaded with attitude. These toy revolvers were everywhere, and they did not mess around. With a strip of gunpowder caps and a snap of the hammer, they let off a crack so loud it would stop a conversation and send up a puff of smoke for added flair. Some models even shot out tiny sparks just to make things feel extra real. Kids loved them. Parents barely blinked. You could buy cap guns that mimicked actual revolvers, lever-action rifles, or cowboy-style six-shooters with metal frames and working triggers. They came in silver, black, or wood grain, with zero thought given to how close they looked to the real thing. These toys were not designed to be subtle. They were designed to be flashy, loud, and endlessly reusable. Of course, more than a few kids lit their fingers on fire or caught stray sparks in their eyes. Still, it was considered all part of growing up. And if those were not convincing enough, Just wait until we get into the toy guns that looked like the real deal, without any hint they were toys at all. In the 1970s, toy guns looked so much like the real thing that even adults had to double-check. Pistols, rifles, and shotguns were molded with realistic metal finishes, wood-style grips, and working trigger actions. There were no orange tips, no safety labels, no warning tags. You could walk into a toy store and buy what looked like an actual handgun, and no one would flinch. Kids would play cops and robbers with these things in neighborhoods, parks, even grocery store parking lots. Police were often called in, only to realize they were dealing with toys. And yes, there were close calls, many of them. Some models even had moving slides, shell-ejecting chambers, or realistic weight and recoil. The line between play and panic was razor-thin, but somehow it was accepted. Nobody saw it as strange. It was just another way to make childhood authentic. Eventually, incidents and tragedies piled up, and legislation was introduced to force manufacturers to add bright markings and change designs. Believe it or not, the next toy on our list involved actual hot plates and molten plastic, and it was a bestseller. If you grew up in the 1970s, you probably remember creepy crawlers, the magical little bug-shaped toys you baked yourself. The kit came with metal molds, bottles of colorful liquid plastic, and a literal open-face hot plate. You would pour the goop into a mold, slide it onto the searing hot burner, and watch it bubble and cook until your custom creepy crawler was ready to peel out and show off. There were no child-proof locks, no auto shut-off features, and definitely no gloves or warnings about touching the hot plate. Burns were part of the experience. Everyone had that one friend who leaned in too close and came away with a melted blister badge of honor. The smell of molten plastic filled the room like incense for unsupervised chaos. And somehow, this was sold as an educational toy. Creativity meets combustion. Parents would just shrug, tell you to be careful, and walk away. Nowadays, any toy that plugs into a wall gets scrutinized, and a child's toy that reaches 400 degrees Fahrenheit? Forget it. Now, if you thought burns were bad, let us talk about the toys that shot actual metal projectiles, with zero protective gear required. BB guns in the 1970s were every kid's dream and every parent's shrug. These were not weak little toys. They were genuine air rifles, capable of firing metal pellets at speeds that left dents in fences and welts on your skin. You could buy one at a hardware store or even the toy aisle of a department store and walk out ready for a backyard war. Safety goggles? Never heard of them. Helmets? Not a chance. BB gun battles were common, and so were injuries. Someone always took a shot to the hand, or worse, the face. "You'll shoot your eye out" was not a joke. It was a warning based on lived experience. And yet, it was practically a rite of passage. Parents might give you a quick talk about aiming away from people, but that was the extent of supervision. Kids ran through woods, fields, and alleyways with loaded BB rifles slung over their shoulders like tiny soldiers. Today, even starter airsoft guns come with strict age recommendations, safety warnings, and protective gear. Back then, the only line between a toy and a weapon was your imagination. And if BB guns felt a little too safe, there were also miniature motorcycles, and no one cared how old you were when you rode one. Mini motorbikes, also known as pocket bikes or mini bikes, were just small enough to look like toys and just fast enough to be terrifying. In the 1970s, kids as young as 7 would zoom around the neighborhood on gas-powered bikes with no license, no helmet, and barely a working brake. These things could hit 30 to 40 miles per hour without breaking a sweat. They were loud, shaky, and built like stripped-down death traps. But to kids, they were freedom in 2 wheels. You could get one for a birthday, toss in some fuel, and be off to the races in seconds. No safety gear was expected, just hold on tight and hope for the best. Parents usually chalked up scrapes and crashes to growing up, and most kids treated road rash like a badge of honor. These bikes were often cobbled together with mismatched parts, had weak or non-existent suspension, and yet were totally street legal in some areas. Today, mini motorbikes require age restrictions, safety checks, and helmets in nearly every state. But back in the day, if you could reach the handlebars, you were good to go. While those bikes were cooking pavement, the next toy on the list was more about cooking: wood. The 1970s were a golden age for questionable arts and crafts, and nothing summed that up better than the wood-burning kit. These kits were marketed as creative fun for kids, but they basically handed you a hot metal pen and told you to draw. The tool reached temperatures over 600 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn wood, leather, cardboard, and whatever else you accidentally touched. It plugged directly into the wall and had no auto shutoff, no heat guard, and no safety grip. You held it like a pencil, your fingers inches away from a red-hot metal tip, and kids loved it. You could etch your name into a piece of pine, burn designs into your school notebook, or start mini-fires by accident, all in a day's work. There were no gloves, no adult supervision required, and no real sense of danger. It was just art. If you burned yourself, shake it off. These days, soldering tools and pyrography pens are regulated, labeled for adult use and kept far from the toy aisle. But back then, it was sold as a rainy day activity for ages 8 and up. If you think that was hot, wait until you hear about the toys that gave kids actual liquid mercury to play with. Yes, kids in the 1970s were casually handed mercury, and they thought it was magical. Tiny metal balls that rolled around like liquid mirrors, mercury was mesmerizing, mysterious, and as we now know, incredibly toxic. But back then, it was a party trick in a test tube. Some science kits included it to demonstrate density or surface tension, while others just tossed it in like a novelty prize. There were even handheld toys, puzzles and mazes, filled with liquid mercury you could tilt and twist. No warning labels, no protective gloves, no idea that exposure could lead to severe neurological damage. Kids would pour it into their hands, roll it around on the table, or crack open a thermometer just to see it up close. It was shiny, it was fun, and it was quietly poisoning everyone in the room. Mercury spills were wiped up with tissues and bare hands. Today, even a broken thermometer requires hazmat protocol. But back then, it was just another toy with a weird shimmer. And if you think that was dangerous, just wait till you hear about the toys that came with actual matches and explosions. Back in the 1970s, pyro-themed toys were basically a parent's worst nightmare disguised as fun. Fireworks sets designed for kids were sold like craft kits. You got fuses, powders, and instructions that boiled down to light it with a match and get out of the way. Some sets included actual tiny rockets. Others came with exploding caps that you could tape to model airplanes or toy tanks to make them blow up during battle reenactments. These were not the gentle snap-and-pop toys you see in stores today. They sparked, flared, and left scorch marks on driveways. No adult supervision was ever really expected. You could buy them at toy stores, pharmacies, or even gas stations. Birthday parties were like mini demolition zones, complete with singed eyebrows and startled pets. And nobody blinked. Of course, accidents happened. Fingers were burned. Garbage bins were set on fire. Once in a while, a backyard shed would take a hit. But that was all just part of growing up. These days, selling explosive toys to kids is a hard no across most of the world, and even adult fireworks are locked behind licensing rules in some places. Are fireworks not chaotic enough? Let us talk about the swinging, clacking menace that turned countless fingers purple. If you were alive in the 1970s, you either had clackers or a bruised hand from someone else's. These simple-looking toys consisted of 2 acrylic or glass balls attached to a string, which you would swing up and down until they slammed together with a satisfying crack. The goal was to build enough momentum that they would smack above and below your hand in perfect rhythm. But perfect rhythm was a pipe dream. Most kids ended up slamming them into their knuckles, forearms, faces, or worse, each other. The balls were solid and heavy, and when they cracked against each other, they could shatter or chip, sending shards flying. And yet, they were marketed as harmless fun. No warnings, no goggles, just a pair of potential missiles tied to a string. Some were even made from glass before the acrylic version caught on. The sound was addictive. The bruises were legendary. Parents grew suspicious when their kids started coming home with swollen fingers and black eyes. Eventually, safety groups caught wind of the injuries and pushed to get them banned. Today, clackers are collector's items, not playroom staples. But if you thought clackers were reckless, just wait until you remember the backyard trampolines that offered zero protection and a fast track to the emergency room. A backyard trampoline in the 1970s was not the cushioned wonderland you see today. It was a giant metal spiderweb stretched over springs with nothing around it but danger. There were no nets, no padding, just steel legs, exposed springs, and a bouncy surface that practically dared you to fly off. Kids would launch themselves sky high, flip in midair, and land in a pile of friends, all on a trampoline set up on concrete or grass with roots and rocks waiting to break your fall. Falls were constant. Sprains, bruises, and the occasional knocked-out tooth were all part of the fun. And of course, the holy grail of backyard chaos, double bouncing your little brother so high he hit the fence. Parents might glance out the window and give a thumbs up, but mostly they let it happen. The trampolines rusted in the rain, sagged in the sun, and still saw daily use. In the 1970s, this was considered a healthy way to burn off energy. Today, even low-end models come with full enclosure nets, foam-wrapped poles, and stern warnings about single jumpers only. But back then, the only rule was, try not to die. If bouncing off a metal springboard was not wild enough, wait until you hear about kids racing plastic trikes downhill with zero brakes and no fear. One of the boldest playground pastimes of the 1970s was turning steep neighborhood hills into racetracks using plastic tricycles. Not the sturdy, rubber-tired ones either. We are talking about low-riding, hard-wheeled models like the Big Wheel, made for flat driveways but hijacked for high-speed downhill runs. The recipe was simple. Find the steepest hill in town, sit low, and push off. Brakes? Not a chance. Helmets? No way. Steering was mostly hope and momentum. These rides turned into missile launches, and the end usually involved a kid sliding sideways into a mailbox or flipping over in someone's front yard. Every crash was followed by laughter, cheering, or someone limping home with a badge of honor scrape across both knees. Parents would sit on porches and occasionally yell, "Slow down," as if that ever worked. The trikes cracked under pressure, wheels melted on hot asphalt, and somehow they kept going. Kids who grew up with these rides developed a deep respect for physics and gravity. Today, toy manufacturers warn against riding anything with wheels on an incline. Back then, the incline was the whole point. And while all of that sounds reckless, nothing sticks in people's memory quite like the goo-filled action figure that literally exploded when it got too hot. Stretch Armstrong was the coolest toy on the shelf, until he burst. This rubbery, muscle-bound figure could be stretched, pulled, twisted, and tied into knots, then slowly returned to his original shape. Inside was a mystery goo that felt like thick honey and was strangely satisfying to squish. But here's the thing. Nobody really knew what was in it, and if it got too warm, the whole toy would weaken, swell, and pop. One moment you were stretching his arms to the ceiling, and the next, you had sticky goop all over your hands, your carpet, and probably your sibling. The goo stuck to everything. It dried like glue, refused to come off clothes, and definitely was not safe to eat, though some kids found that out the hard way. Stretch Armstrongs were notorious for splitting at the seams, especially after a summer in the sun or a few too many wrestling matches with G.I. Joe parents complained. Kids shrugged, and everyone still wanted one. Modern toy safety standards would never approve something filled with unknown gel that ruptured like a water balloon under stress. But in the 1970s, that was just part of the magic. Did not blow your mind. Wait until you see the toys that let kids puff on fake cigarettes that blew out real smoke. Toy cigarettes were everywhere in the 1970s. Candy stores, corner shops, even party favor bags. Some were made of chalky sugar, others were bubblegum sticks, But the ones that really pushed the line were the ones that actually puffed smoke. These toys had a fine powder inside that would shoot out a puff when you blew on them or took a fake drag. The effect? Uncannily real. Kids strutted around playgrounds pretending to smoke like movie stars, mimicking every gesture they saw on television, from the slow exhale to the dramatic flick of the wrist. Some toy cigarettes even came in flip-top boxes with designs nearly identical to real cigarette brands. There were no disclaimers, no health warnings, and certainly no concern that this might normalize smoking. In fact, it kind of did. To a kid in the 1970s, pretending to smoke was just part of playtime. Eventually, these products came under fire from health advocates and were banned or redesigned into less convincing versions. But at the time, no one thought twice. And while pretending to inhale carcinogens was one kind of playground thrill, the real danger started once you climbed to the top of the jungle gym, over solid concrete. If you were hanging upside down from a jungle gym in the 1970s, chances are there was nothing beneath you but concrete and consequences. Playgrounds back then were built like obstacle courses designed by stunt coordinators. Tall steel bars, monkey rings, fireman poles, you name it. And all of it was bolted over unforgiving asphalt or bare concrete slabs, no mulch, no rubber padding, just the sweet crunch of your knees hitting pavement if you missed a rung. Kids would climb 20 feet high, dangle like circus performers, and leap off just to prove they could. Scrapes and bruises were a daily badge of honor. Broken bones? Just another story to brag about. Parents watched from picnic benches, cheering or casually reminding you not to cry too loud. These jungle gyms were hot in the sun, slippery in the rain, and downright unforgiving in every season. Yet, they were beloved. Today's playgrounds are wrapped in foam, guarded by fences, and designed to meet strict fall height regulations. But back then, risk was part of the appeal. And if you think falling from 10 feet was intense, just wait until you hear about the slingshots that turned soda cans and neighborhood windows into target practice. High-powered slingshots in the 1970s were not flimsy toys with foam pellets. These were the real deal. Y-shaped metal frames, thick rubber tubing, and enough tension to launch steel balls at frightening speeds. You could aim at tin cans, tree trunks, or your little brother if you were feeling bold. They were sold at sporting goods stores and even some toy shops, often marketed as youth hunting tools. And yes, some kids took that seriously. Eye protection, optional, rules, unspoken. It started with aluminum cans but quickly turned into backyard warfare, complete with makeshift forts and emergency ceasefires. Bruised arms, broken windows, and one or two terrified squirrels later, and you had a memory that lasted a lifetime. Parents often shrugged it off as boys being boys, and kids treated it like a rite of passage. These slingshots had range, force, and just enough unpredictability to make every shot feel like a mini adventure or accident. Eventually, concerns about eye injuries and property damage led to restrictions and redesigns. But in the 1970s, if you could pull the band back and aim, you were ready for battle. And if flinging metal at full speed seemed extreme, the next thing on the list actually involved giving kids real weapons, disguised as toys. Toy swords and guns in the 1970s were made of metal. Not lightweight aluminum or soft plastic, but cold, heavy, solid metal. These were not props. These were miniaturized replicas that could double as paperweights or blunt objects in the wrong hands. The swords were styled like pirate sabers, medieval broadswords, or ninja blades, complete with sharp corners and real weight. The toy guns? Solid enough to crack a table if you dropped one. They looked real, felt real, and hurt real bad when used in backyard duels. Kids would whack each other in full costume, staging dramatic battles that usually ended with someone crying, someone bleeding, and someone laughing way too hard. These toys were not sold with warnings. They were not for display only. They were meant to be used, swung, and fired in every possible direction. Today's toy weapons are foam-padded, neon-colored, and loaded with disclaimers. But in the 1970s, the only rule was, do not aim for the face. And if handing kids a solid metal sword sounds questionable, just wait until we talk about letting them bounce around freely in the back of moving pickup trucks, for fun. One of the most thrilling rides you could have in the 1970s was not at an amusement park. It was in the back of a pickup truck going 50 miles per hour down a bumpy road. No seat belts, no seats, no sides high enough to do anything except give you a slightly better view of what you were about to fall out into. Kids would sit on coolers, tire wells, or just the flat truck bed, bouncing along as the driver hit potholes, slammed on brakes, or took turns like a rally car. And the best part? It was completely normal. Parents would load up a half-dozen neighborhood kids and head to the lake, the store, or across state lines with not a single buckle in sight. Wind in your hair, gravel in your teeth. It was all part of the charm. There was no concept of passenger safety back there. It was a mobile playground with a tailgate. Eventually, states began rolling out laws requiring seat belts and limiting passengers to the cab. But for a solid stretch of time, riding in the back was the highlight of any weekend. And as risky as that was, it still does not compare to skateboarding downhill in the 1970s, with no pads, no shoes, and absolutely no fear. In the 1970s, skateboarding was not about tricks or culture. It was about staying alive. Boards were short, wheels were rock-hard clay, and bearings sounded like they were stolen from a shopping cart. Kids would find the steepest hill in the neighborhood, kick off barefoot, and just hope the gravel did not chew up their toes before the pavement got them. There were no helmets, no knee pads, no elbow pads, and definitely no half pipes. Tricks? You were lucky to stay upright for more than 30 seconds. Skateboarding was loud, shaky, and almost always ended with a skid, a scrape, or a spectacular wipeout. The boards had no grip tape, the trucks were stiff, and stopping meant flinging yourself into a hedge or foot dragging until your skin gave out. And yet, everyone did it. Streets echoed with the sound of wobbling wheels and kids yelling, "Watch this!" right before they disappeared into a bush. Injuries were part of the package. Ankles were twisted, chins were scraped, arms got road rash. No one sued, no one blamed the board. You just walked it off, or hobbled it off, and tried again tomorrow. These days, skate parks require safety gear by law, and most kids learn to fall before they learn to ride. But back then, learning to fall was the ride. And when kids were not flying downhill barefoot, they were up in trees building skyscrapers made of scrap wood, bent nails, and overconfidence. If you grew up in the 1970s, you either had a treehouse or you helped someone fall out of one. These were not the HGTV-style playhouses of today. They were Frankenstein creations made from leftover plywood, rusty nails, and zero adult involvement. The process was beautifully chaotic. Find some wood behind the shed, borrow Dad's hammer, and climb as high as the branches would let you. Ladders were made from nailed-in boards. Support beams were optional. Floors had more gaps than actual floor. Roofs, if they existed, were old sheets or half-broken fences. And somehow, these towering death traps were sacred spaces. Kids would haul up comic books, snacks, water guns, and make-believe weapons, claiming ownership with a cardboard sign and a "no girls allowed" rule that lasted exactly one afternoon. The real danger was not in playing inside the treehouse. It was in getting to it. Rope swings snapped, ladder rungs gave way, and yet broken arms were worn like medals of bravery. No parent supervised, no inspector ever checked it, and the fact that it stayed upright through one storm felt like a construction miracle. Today, building anything over 4 feet off the ground requires permits, safety rails, and grown-up help. But in the 1970s, if you could climb it, you could build it. And if those treehouse injuries were not enough, let's talk about summertime's most unsuspecting hazard: inflatable pools on blazing asphalt. Inflatable pools in the 1970s were a simple joy. Blow it up, fill it with hose water, and throw yourself in. But most families didn't bother setting them up on grass. Nope. They went right on the driveway, baking in the full afternoon sun like a vinyl skillet. The blacktop or concrete underneath would heat up until it could fry an egg, and once that pool deflated even a little, you found yourself sitting in puddles of water over a mini lava field. Kids got sunburns and blisters without even realizing it. And stepping in or out barefoot? That was a trial by fire. There were no pool covers, no sunshades, and definitely no adults standing by with sunscreen. The water came straight from the hose, ice cold at first, then bath water by late afternoon. Everyone's feet were pruny, someone always slipped, and you inevitably scraped your leg on that rough plastic edge trying to cannonball into 12 inches of water. But it was the highlight of summer. Sprinklers, water balloons, and driveway pools were the holy trinity of childhood hydration. Just in case that was not risky enough, some kids went even higher, right to the roof of the garage, umbrella in hand, ready to test gravity. There was a strange magic to the belief that if you jumped from a roof with an umbrella, you might float. Thank Mary Poppins for that. In the 1970s, countless kids made the leap, from tool sheds, porches, and garages, clutching their parents' best umbrella with the kind of faith only a child could muster. The goal? A graceful descent. The reality? A direct crash landing. The umbrella would instantly flip inside out, collapse mid-air, or get torn straight from their hands by the wind. Kids hit bushes, landed on the lawn, or bounced off the driveway with a thud and a grunt. But they got up, sometimes limping, sometimes laughing, and then they climbed right back up to try again. Today, even the thought of letting a child jump off a roof would bring social services to your door. But back then, you just hoped the umbrella wasn't your mom's favorite one. And if parachuting off garages sounds wild, wait until you hear about what happened every 4th of July, when firecrackers turned into full-on battles. The 4th of July in the 1970s was less about fireworks shows and more about neighborhood-wide firecracker wars. Kids armed themselves with Roman candles, bottle rockets, and strings of firecrackers and turned cul-de-sacs into war zones. Roman candles were not held at arm's length. They were aimed. You'd light one, count to 3, and then launch glowing orbs of fire at your friends like magical artillery. Firecracker packs were unstrung and tossed one by one, or hidden under lawn chairs for surprise detonations. Sparks flew, trash cans smoked. Kids darted behind bushes like pyromaniac ninjas. No goggles, no gloves, just matches, lighters, and absolute chaos. Parents stood by with sparklers and vague concern, but mostly they just told everyone to be careful. Singed shirts and ringing ears were just part of the fun. If someone caught a firework to the arm, they got a cold rag and a warning not to cry. Today, lighting a Roman candle in a public area gets you a fine or a police escort. The Fisher-Price roller skates of the 1980s were a rite of passage and a recipe for disaster. Marketed as beginner-friendly, they strapped right over your sneakers with plastic clips and offered no ankle support, no control, and absolutely no brakes. You'd take 2 steps and feel like a baby giraffe on ice. Once those wheels started rolling, good luck stopping unless you hit a patch of grass or a parked car. The plastic wheels were rock hard, the straps barely held, and the only safety feature was your mom yelling from the porch. Every sidewalk crack became a personal lawsuit waiting to happen. Knees were scraped, elbows were bruised, and somehow that just made them cooler. You'd decorate them with stickers, wear them inside the house, and attempt jumps off the curb that nearly ended your career before it began. Manufacturers added brakes, padding, and adjustable sizing. But the original no-brake rockets? Banned, recalled, and memorialized in every scraped knee photo from your childhood. If you skated too far from home, you might have run into someone carrying the next banned item, something that looked a little too real. Electric slimming belts were the miracle fitness gadget of the 1980s, or so the ads claimed. Wrap it around your waist, plug it in, flip the switch, and prepare to get electrocuted into peak physical form. These belts sent pulsing electric shocks into your abdomen under the promise of stimulating muscles and burning fat. What they really did? Cause skin burns, fainting spells, and enough emergency room visits to make the Food and Drug Administration step in. They buzzed, jolted, and sometimes sparked, especially if you were sweaty, which the instruction manual encouraged. You'd lie there, twitching like a frog in biology class, convinced the pain meant it was working. These devices became so notorious that many were banned or pulled from shelves by the late 1980s. Today's fitness tech might still overpromise, but at least it doesn't literally jolt you awake. Unless you miss the 1980s, in which case, wait until you see what they handed to kids in the toy aisle next. A survival knife inspired by Rambo. Because what could go wrong? It looked like something straight out of a haunted dollhouse and somehow got greenlit as a beauty product. The Rejuvenique face mask promised younger, firmer skin through electrical muscle stimulation, which is a fancy way of saying it zapped your face with little shocks. Advertised by a former soap opera star, the mask wrapped around your head like a plastic exoskeleton and turned your facial routine into something that felt like a scene from a horror film. The idea was that the stimulation would tone your face like a gym tones your body, but customers mostly reported mild burns, numbness, and the distinct feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. Despite airing on television with the enthusiasm of a late-night miracle cure, it flopped hard. It was the kind of product that felt less like a beauty tool and more like a sci-fi movie prop that somehow escaped the set. Still, you had to admire the ambition. If you could survive the Rejuvenique, surely you could survive anything the 1980s had to throw at you. And as it turns out, that next throw was straight at the kids, because someone thought gym fashion should start in elementary school. Back before Halloween became a yearly anxiety fest, taking unmarked candy from a neighbor was just how the night worked. You rang a doorbell, yelled, "Trick or treat," and got handed whatever someone had lying around. Loose jelly beans? Great. Homemade fudge and wax paper? Even better. The idea that candy needed to be sealed and tamper-proof had not fully caught on yet. No one was worried about needles or poison. Your biggest fear was getting a box of raisins. Parents did not comb through your haul under a flashlight. They just told you not to eat it all at once. The neighbor handing out popcorn balls or wrapped caramels was not suspicious. They were the cool house. Trust was the currency of the neighborhood, and if someone put effort into a treat, you respected it. Now, we wrap everything in layers of packaging and double-check labels like candy is a security threat. And after all that sugar buzz, you already knew where the real party was, under a disco ball, skates on, and lyrics your parents probably should have listened to more closely. The floppy disk, a cornerstone of early personal computing, emerged in the late 1960s, symbolizing the first foray into portable digital storage. When the 3.5-inch floppy was introduced, many pondered, who would ever need that much storage? A notion that now elicits a chuckle in our gigabyte-saturated age. The act of inserting a floppy disk, accompanied by its characteristic click, defined an era of computing in the 80s and 90s. Despite its obsolescence due to advancing storage technologies, the floppy disk endures in the digital lexicon, immortalized as the universal save file icon. This subtle homage serves as a nostalgic reminder of the disk's pivotal role in the evolution of data storage and management. Hypercolor shirts were the 80s fashion flex you didn't ask for. Touch them, and they changed color. Sweat? Changed color. Breathing too hard in class? Boom, color change. These shirts were made with thermochromic dyes that reacted to temperature, which was science speak for everyone can now see your armpit situation. They were magical for about 10 minutes and then quickly turned into an awkward middle school experiment. But the real danger was in the dye. Some hypercolor clothing was made with chemicals that caused skin irritation, allergic reactions, and, in worst-case scenarios, a rash that looked like a heat map of embarrassment. Combine that with fading colors, poor washing instructions, and mystery reactions when exposed to sunblock or deodorant, and you had a garment that fought back. Eventually, the clothing faded for good, literally and figuratively, and safety concerns helped bury the trend for a while. Still, for a few brief years, it was the coolest, most color-shifting thing you could wear until it gave you hives. If your shirt didn't leave a mark, the next toy definitely did, especially when it was supposed to be just plastic. Because in 1969, Pan American Airlines launched a waiting list for commercial flights to the moon. No joke. People were lining up to get their names on this list. The idea was simple. We made it to the moon, so the next logical step was to sell tickets. Over 90,000 people signed up, excited about the idea of sipping martinis in zero gravity and watching the Earth rise outside their window. And Pan Am treated it like a real thing. They issued membership cards, called it the First Moon Flights Club, and promised that when the day came, they would call. The only problem? There was no plan, no actual timeline, no spaceship. It was a publicity stunt that spiraled out of control. People bought into the dream hard, and Pan Am was not about to correct them. When the company went bankrupt in the 1980s, it had never even started building anything to take people to space. The dream fizzled out, but it proved just how hungry the world was for a taste of the future. And nowhere was that hunger more obvious than in people's homes, where they tried to bring cinema magic to life with a machine the size of a small refrigerator. Muscle pants for kids, that was the pitch. Somewhere, a grown-up looked at a child and said, "You know what this kid needs? Pants that scream steroid energy." These were Zubaz-style leggings with wild patterns and stretch material designed to mimic the bodybuilding look of adult gym rats. Except they were made for children. The problem was not just the patterns, which, by the way, included everything from neon zebra stripes to camouflage lightning bolts. It was that kids had no idea how to wear them. The pants were often too tight or too loose, and they came with this weird fake athletic vibe that clashed hard with the Sesame Street lunchboxes. These pants were a hard no. Schools started quietly banning them for being distracting, and parents got tired of explaining to teachers that no, their child was not training for a junior weightlifting championship. They were just victims of 1980s fashion. The trend came and went faster than you could say bicep curl. But speaking of trying too hard to look futuristic, let us talk about the time Atari thought your forehead could play video games. Leaving kids in the car while you shopped was not only common, it was considered efficient parenting. You would crack the window a little, toss a snack in the back seat, and tell them not to touch the gear shift. That was it. No seat warmers, no climate control, just the burning hot vinyl seats and a juice box to keep them busy. You would run into the grocery store, the post office, maybe even the mall, and come back 20 minutes later like it was nothing. Sometimes the kid was asleep, sometimes reading, sometimes playing with the door locks like it was a game. There were no viral videos or angry phone calls to the authorities. People assumed kids were tougher back then, or maybe they just really trusted that nothing would go wrong. Sure, you would get the occasional warning to not talk to strangers through the car window, but that was the extent of it. It was all part of the era's free-range approach to parenting. And while the kids were stuck in the car, the adults, they were likely sneaking a break of their own, somewhere smoky and very much on school property. Imagine a time when the centerpiece of every living room was a bulky, boxy behemoth, the CRT TV. Coming into prominence in the 1950s, this technological marvel turned the humble living room into a bustling family theater. Picture the excitement as families gathered around to watch the moon landing or the latest episode of I Love Lucy. Despite its hefty frame, the CRT TV was the window to the world until the sleek and slender flat screens of the early 2000s gently nudged it into the annals of history. Yet, ask any vintage video game enthusiast, and they'll wax poetic about the unmatched charm of playing on a CRT. Before streaming in HD, the CRT TV was the family's bond, the newsbringer, and the entertainer, all rolled into one. Slap bracelets were the forbidden fruit of every 1980s classroom. One second they were straight, the next, snap, they wrapped around your wrist like a coiled snake with attitude. Covered in neon fabric, animal print, or glitter, they looked innocent enough. But underneath the fun was a thin strip of spring steel that had one job: launch at high speed and curve mid-air. The problem? That metal core wasn't exactly kid-proof. If the fabric wore down, that hidden strip turned into a razor-thin whip. Kids ended up with deep scratches, cuts, and in some cases, open wounds. Teachers confiscated them. Parents complained. Schools banned them faster than you could say, Lisa Frank. Still, the appeal was undeniable. There was something addictive about that sharp snap on your wrist, like your bracelet had a personality of its own. Toy companies tried to fix the design, adding thicker fabric and safety tabs. But by then, the damage was done, and so were dozens of kids' sleeves, wrists, and friendships. And while slap bracelets left marks on your arm, the next trend turned your living room into a slow-motion air hazard. So let us talk about telex car phones, the early kind. These were supposed to be the peak of convenience, your own private phone line inside your car. Sounds slick, right? Except using one felt like yelling into a toaster that barely heard you. The equipment alone took up half your trunk, with clunky transceivers and roof antennas that made your car look like a spy van. You would pick up the phone, wait for a signal, and then shout into the handset while everyone in traffic stared at you like you were calling from the moon. Reception? Spotty on the best of days. Dropouts were constant, and unless you were in the middle of a major city, the odds of actually getting through were slim to none. Add to that the price tag, which could run higher than the car itself, and it becomes pretty clear why telex car phones never caught on. Not to mention, you had zero privacy. People in the next lane could hear your entire conversation. It was supposed to be the future, but it felt more like a prank. Still, if we are talking about future flops, nothing tops the brief moment in time where Hertz thought regular folks might fly to work. There was a brief, glorious moment in the 1980s when being a math nerd actually made you cool, and that was all thanks to the digital calculator watch. You could do basic math right on your wrist. Addition, subtraction, maybe a little division if you were feeling wild. These watches were sleek, futuristic, and they gave kids the illusion of being a young computer genius. But the novelty wore off faster than a sticker on a locker. Teachers banned them from classrooms almost instantly. Kids were using them to cheat on math tests or just to show off during spelling bees. Parents got tired of replacing batteries, and school administrators were not thrilled with little kids clicking away during morning announcements. Plus, if you had even slightly chubby fingers, good luck hitting the right button. It was a gadget that promised convenience, but delivered mostly frustration and a few detention slips. And while that fad disappeared into backpacks and sock drawers, another 1980s product was trying way too hard to sell itself with big names and bigger commercials. But even with a football legend at the front, it still missed the catch. If you were a kid in the 1970s, chugging water straight from the garden hose was basically a rite of passage. You would be out playing tag, riding bikes, or building questionable tree forts and suddenly realize you were dying of thirst. No one ran inside for a water bottle. You went for the hose. You cranked the knob, let the sun-heated water blast out for a few seconds, and then put your mouth right on the nozzle. No one asked where the hose had been or what might be growing inside it. Rubbery taste? Totally normal. Mystery specks? Built character. Parents barely noticed unless you soaked your shirt. Nobody thought twice about what kinds of chemicals were leaching from the plastic or whether small bugs had made it their home. We just drank and kept running. But when it came to food, there were rules. Except during Halloween, when those rules took a break and you took candy from strangers with zero hesitation. The VCR, a marvel that arrived in the 1970s, was akin to a magician in a box, granting us the power to capture time itself. Suddenly, TV schedules no longer dictated our lives. We could record, rewind, and relive our favorite moments at will. The VCR was the herald of home cinema, a concept so revolutionary that even its hefty price tag couldn't dampen its allure. It's a testament to its impact that phrases like "be kind, rewind" are etched in the collective memory of a generation. As DVDs and streaming services emerged, the VCR's star faded, but its legacy of shaping family movie nights and introducing the world to video rentals lives on. Max Headroom was supposed to be the future, a computer-generated, sarcastic television host who stuttered stylishly and wore sunglasses at night. He was the face of a dystopian digital world, equal parts cyberpunk icon and artificial intelligence with an attitude. Advertisers loved him, especially soda companies, so someone had the bright idea. Let us give him a full television series. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The Max Headroom show was visually interesting but narratively confusing. It tried to blend science fiction with satire, wrapped in glitchy editing and background noise. Most of the time, you were not sure if the show was broken or just being artsy. The plotline featured underground hackers, corrupt corporations, and a bleak media landscape, which ironically kind of predicted the internet. And Max, once a futuristic face of advertising, became more of a trivia answer at bar night. Still, his influence stuck around in weird ways. You can spot traces of Max Headroom in everything from video game villains to pop music videos. And if you thought that was sensory overload, wait until we talk about the time theaters tried to make movies smell like real life. Enter the Sony CV-2000. This was supposed to be the next big leap in home entertainment. A video recorder you could use at home long before VHS was a thing. It sounds amazing, right? Until you realize this beast was massive, heavy, and cost more than most people's cars at the time. We are talking over $1,000 in 1960s money, which is a good chunk of a year's salary for the average person. But price was just one problem. The CV-2000 used reel-to-reel videotape, and even getting it to work with your television set was a gamble. It only recorded in black and white. You had to plug in a separate camera, adjust the knobs just right, and cross your fingers. If anything went wrong, and it often did, you were stuck. Playback was spotty, the tapes jammed constantly, and editing footage? Forget it. For a product meant to bring television magic into your home, it mostly just brought headaches. And despite being the first of its kind, it quietly faded into obscurity, beaten later by cheaper, easier options. But you know what still had people gathering around the television back then? A wild piece of gear that looked like it came straight off a flying saucer. Toy helicopters in the 1980s were mechanical marvels and total mayhem. They came with battery packs, long plastic wires, and a launch mechanism that would send a spinning metal-bladed helicopter screaming through the air at top speed. These choppers weren't made of foam. They had real weight, real torque, and real potential to slice through your bangs. Every kid had the same goal: launch it as high as possible. Every adult had the same reaction: duck and cover. The metal blades would spin with enough force to cut skin, tangle in hair, or put a dent in your wood paneling. Worst part? Some came with combat attachments like pretend missiles or landing claws, because nothing screams safe fun like turning your living room into an active airspace. Stories of black eyes, forehead welts, and chipped teeth piled up fast. Eventually, manufacturers were forced to swap out metal parts for plastic, reduce power, and add so many warning labels it looked like the back of a shampoo bottle. But by then, the damage was done, literally. If your brain managed to survive the helicopter hits, good luck keeping it safe with the art supplies that followed. Ah yes, Sinclair's home chemistry lab sets. Nothing says wholesome childhood fun like handing 10-year-olds real acids, flammable powders, and the ability to create small explosions in the garage. In the early 1960s, these kits were everywhere. Marketed as educational, they were part science, part spectacle. Kids could grow crystals, mix glowing liquids, and experiment with reactions that would make any science teacher twitch. But the truth? These kits were a ticking time bomb. Figuratively and sometimes literally. They included potassium nitrate, sulfur, and other compounds that today would be locked in a school lab under triple-sealed storage. There were instructions for creating mini smoke bombs, acids that could burn through metal, and even chemical reactions that, if mixed incorrectly, could send a glass beaker flying across the room. Lawsuits started piling in. So did safety warnings. By the end of the decade, the most dangerous sets were pulled from shelves, and future versions were watered down to the point of being glorified food coloring. Still, for a brief window of time, American kids had access to a fully stocked chemical arsenal. But if you think a little sulfur was intense, you should smell what came next. And no, it wasn't roses. Saturday morning cartoons were a sacred ritual. You poured yourself a bowl of cereal, plopped down in front of the television, and prepared to spend the next few hours in a sugar-fueled animation binge. But sprinkled between all those talking animals and laser-blasting space battles? Beer ads? That's right. Alcohol companies had no problem promoting their newest brew to an audience still wearing footy pajamas. You could go from He-Man saving the universe to a slow-motion pour of foamy beer into a frosted mug, all in the same commercial break. And these were not vague nods to adult life. We are talking full-on beer jingles with catchy tunes and smiling actors, clinking glasses in backyard barbecues. Kids grew up humming these tunes without even knowing what they were singing about. To the networks, airtime was airtime. If it sold, it played. No one raised a red flag. Parents were more worried about how many Pop-Tarts you ate than whether your favorite cartoon was brought to you by a six-pack of light beer. And when the commercials ended, you ran outside with your friends. No shoes, no helmets, just two wheels and a scraped knee waiting to happen. Enter the 1990s, and with it, the era of the Discman. Sony's portable CD player changed the game by offering music lovers a new level of sound quality and the novelty of skipping tracks with the push of a button. It was the soundtrack to countless commutes and the precursor to our modern on-demand listening habits. But as MP3 players and streaming services emerged, offering vast libraries of music in compact file-based formats, the Discman's reign came to an end. The transition from physical discs to digital files marked a pivotal moment in music consumption, pushing portability and convenience to new heights. Yet for a time, the Discman was the pinnacle of personal audio technology, a testament to the ever-evolving journey of music and its enthusiasts. The garbage Pail Kids movie is the textbook example of a terrible idea being taken way too seriously. The trading cards were already controversial. Gross-out humor, exaggerated features, bodily functions turned into punchlines. But they were iconic. So naturally, someone decided to turn them into a full-length feature film. And it was a mess. The characters were played by little people in horrifying animatronic masks that barely moved, giving every scene a nightmarish vibe. The plot? A vague attempt at a coming-of-age story with elements of science fiction and slapstick comedy, all of it soaked in questionable effects and even worse acting. Even die-hard fans of the cards walked out of theaters feeling like they had just lost a piece of their childhood. Critics called it one of the worst films ever made, and audiences agreed. It tanked at the box office, vanished from theaters, and was quietly swept under the rug. The only thing this movie managed to accomplish was proving that not all nostalgia belongs on the big screen. But if you think that was a bitter taste, just wait until we talk about a candy bar that tried to be classy and ended up at the bottom of the vending machine. Aquanet's scented hairspray line hit the shelves in 1968, hoping to combine the hold of a hair helmet with the charm of a perfume ad. The brand was already a household name. By then, Aquanet had glued more bouffants in place than any other product on the market. But someone in marketing must have thought, you know what this cloud of chemicals needs? Flowers. So they rolled out a special line of floral-scented versions. There were rose, jasmine, even a spring breeze blend. The idea was to give users a refreshing, elegant aroma while locking their hairstyle in place for hours. But it backfired, fast. The floral notes clashed with every other scent in a person's routine. The smells mixed into something that made elevators unbearable. To make matters worse, the scent faded quickly, leaving behind the signature Aquanet chemical musk, just with a weird dying flower twist. Even die-hard Aquanet fans could not justify it. By the early 1970s, the line quietly disappeared from shelves. Aquanet stuck around, but its foray into fragrance was a short and smelly detour. But if you want a true example of how the 1960s misunderstood its audience, just look at the British bike that tried to win over American teens by shrinking everything they loved. Once a beacon of connectivity, the payphone stood as a testament to public communication. Scattered across urban and rural landscapes, they offered a lifeline, a portal to distant voices. Indeed, finding a forgotten quarter in the coin return slot felt akin to winning the lottery, a small urban treasure hunt that could brighten any day. As cell phones became our constant companions, the need for these metal guardians waned, and they vanished from our streets. Yet, their iconic image lives on in movies and memories, a relic of a time when staying in touch meant a pocket full of coins and a booth around the corner. Yep, you heard that right. In the 1970s, you could go to the store and buy a science kit that came with actual radioactive samples. Glowing rocks, uranium ore, the whole radioactive shebang. These kits were sold as educational tools, a way to spark curiosity in young minds. And they did, right before they sparked some very serious health concerns. Back then, no one batted an eye. Parents figured if it came in a box with a smiling cartoon scientist on the front, it had to be safe. Kids were in their rooms waving Geiger counters around like they were playing laser tag, all while absorbing trace amounts of nuclear material. It was science. It was cool. It was totally wild. Of course, by the time the risks caught up to the curiosity, these kits had already found their way into thousands of households. That glow-in-the-dark magic? Yeah, turns out it was not so magical after all. But if you thought glowing uranium in your closet was risky, wait until you hear what people kept in their trucks, in full view, completely unlocked, and nobody cared. If you made it out of the 1970s in one piece, hit like, drop your wildest memory in the comments, and subscribe for more dangerously nostalgic fun.